A book so dangerous it was banned by the Catholic Church. So corrupting it was blamed for the rise of tyrants. So feared that even today, people debate whether it should be studied or burned. The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli isn't just a book, it's a weapon. It exposed a brutal truth about power, a truth that rulers wanted buried. It shattered the fairy tale that kings ruled by divine right, and that good rulers were loved. Machiavelli said the quiet part out loud. Power isn't about being good, it's about being effective. If a ruler had to lie, cheat, or kill to survive, then so be it. That terrified people, and it got the Prince banned. But here's the real question. Was it censored because it was evil or because it was right? To answer that, we need to go back to the early 1500s. Italy wasn't a unified country yet. It was a battleground. City-states like Florence, Venice, and Milan were constantly at war. The Pope wasn't just a religious figure. He was a military leader who raised armies. The powerful families, like the Medicis and the Borgias, schemed, poisoned, and betrayed each other to climb to the top. It was a world where power meant survival and weakness meant death. And right in the middle of all this, Niccolo Machiavelli. He wasn't a king. He wasn't a warrior. He was a civil servant, a diplomat, a thinker. He worked for the Republic of Florence, negotiating with kings, spying on enemies, and tried to keep his city from being swallowed up by war. For over a decade, he played the game of politics. But in 1512, he lost. The powerful Medici family seized Florence. Machiavelli was accused of conspiracy, arrested, and tortured. His career? Destroyed. His reputation? Ruined. And with nothing left, he sat down and wrote The Prince, a short, brutal guide to power designed to impress the very family that had cast him aside. But instead of earning him their favor, the Prince made him infamous. Now, to understand why this book caused so much panic, you have to realize something. Before The Prince, political books were all about virtue. Rulers were supposed to be just merciful and moral. Machiavelli? He didn't care about that. He cared about results. He argued that power wasn't about being good. It was about being effective. If a ruler had to lie, cheat, or kill to stay in power, then so be it. Mercy? Useless. Honesty? Dangerous. Morality? A luxury that only the weak could afford. The only thing that mattered was stability, control, and survival. He dropped lines like, "It is better to be feared than loved, if one cannot be both." He warned rulers not to trust their people too much because, given a chance, they would betray them. He praised historical figures who were ruthless, saying they understood that power was about strength, not kindness. And this terrified people. When The Prince started circulating, it was like a bomb went off in the world of politics. Some rulers read it in secret, realizing they had been following its lessons without even knowing it. Others were horrified, calling it the work of the devil. And the Catholic Church? They weren't about to let this kind of thinking spread. In 1559, the Vatican officially banned The Prince, putting it on the index of prohibited books. To them, Machiavelli was dangerous because he separated politics from morality. He didn't talk about ruling as a divine duty. He talked about it as a game of survival, one where religion was just another tool to control the masses. And that was unacceptable. But here's the thing about banning a book. It just makes people want to read it more. Despite the ban, The Prince spread. Secret copies circulated among scholars, rulers, and military strategists. And as time passed, people started to see something interesting. History proved Machiavelli right. Look at the rulers who lasted: Julius Caesar, Napoleon, even modern politicians. Were they kind? Were they fair? Or were they ruthless when they needed to be? Even if they had never read The Prince, they were following its rules. Because those rules, they worked. And that's the uncomfortable truth. Machiavelli didn't create the game of power. He just wrote down how it was played. He didn't invent corruption, deception, and manipulation. He just pointed them out. And people hated him for it. But here's where things get really interesting. The Prince wasn't even his full philosophy. If you read his other works, like his discourses on Livy, you'll see that Machiavelli actually preferred republics over tyrannies. He admired Rome, a state built on laws and institutions, not just the will of one ruler. So why write The Prince, a book that seems to praise dictators? Because Machiavelli wasn't writing what he believed. He was writing what he observed. That's why The Prince has never gone away. Leaders, CEOs, military generals, they still read it. Not because they want to be villains, but because they know power isn't always fair. Sometimes, the choices aren't between good and evil. They're between survival and destruction. And anyone who ignores that reality, they don't last long. But here's the cruel twist. Machiavelli never lived to see his book's success. He died in exile, a failed politician, never knowing that his little book would become one of the most influential works of all time. So now you have to ask yourself, was Machiavelli a villain? A genius? A man ahead of his time? Or just the only person brave enough to say out loud what everyone else was too afraid to admit? Because whether we like it or not, the world still runs on Machiavellian rules. The only question is, are you paying attention?